I don't know. I think people should be happy about birthdays no matter what age they are, but
Jesus.
I don't have to complain about anything at this point.
I don't know if you heard. So new people moved in the other day, and there was just like the biggest bump that just happened above me.
Oh Jesus!
So I hope no one died.
Man, when well, hopefully it's a happy bump. I don't know. When I first moved into my apartment, I had the best. Like, it was amazing. Like, I'm the one that felt bad. Like, whoever this guy was, he seemed to live alone. He woke up kind of early, but he was not loud. And this dude was in bed by 10 o'clock every night. I mean,
oh man,
just no. And he snored loudly, like really loudly, to the point where like I could hear it slightly, but it was like no big deal, right? Like, the guy was in bed 10 p.m. every night, no noise, perfect. And then he moved out after like a couple months of me having moved in. And then the people that moved in, like...
Were they just the worst?
They just fuck all the time, man. Like, they just... Like, and she's loud. Like, and if you ask me, she's faking, right? Like, because I can hear this clearly, right? Like, this is like, they are audible. And in my opinion, she is putting on a show, okay? Like, this is just like fake porn sound 101, but she's really A for effort, you know what I mean? Like, they are loud.
Oh boy. Well, I think I hopefully you moved, or they moved, or...
No, they're still there.
Oh boy.
I don't know. At this point, it's just, I have earplugs. I don't know what I do. It's just like, or you just kind of drown it out, right? Like, I'm not prudish about it. It's just kind of annoying. Like, ugh, I have to listen to this. I'm trying to sleep.
Anyway, we should probably get on the topic.
So on that note, we're going to be talking about religion today. About being good chantry boys and chantry girls.
No big deal. So this is kind of based off of, I get so many requests to do videos on specifically the Maker, not so much explaining the lore behind it, but asking about the theory of who is the Maker and what could he be. And I kind of feel like asking who is the Maker is kind of missing the point of the Maker. So I just want to kind of discuss this on a podcast setting.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I think it's a good topic for a podcast. I think it's one of those ideas, like, where when I try to think about it, because I have, I think about religion in the context of games, and like at times I've toyed around with making a video on it, but it's one of those tricky topics where if you're just talking to yourself, I should say if I'm talking to myself about it, I have I run the risk of running off on some weird esoteric tangent about the nature of deity and all these other things. And so, yeah, conversation setting is probably better.
Yeah. So I guess, how do we want to structure this? Do we want to talk about a little bit of, like, what the Maker is for people that might not know, or should we just, like, jump right into it?
Well, I think one thing that's kind of interesting, right, because I found that this is fictionally where any discussion of the Maker gets more interesting, because at first glance it's just like, oh, there's a Maker, and the first time I'm playing Dragon Age Origins, I'm kind of wrapping my head around it, and I'm going, okay, that's the Maker, this is Andraste, so she's kind of like a deity, but she got so she's kind of like Mary and Jesus rolled into one. And then, like, okay, the Chantry is like the Catholic Church specifically, but also more broadly Judeo-Christian culture. So the Maker is like the Western god. So, okay, so I'm doing all of that, but I'm like, it all just felt like a placeholder to me. And then when it really got interesting, were certain aspects that really started to challenge what the Chantry's version of things was. I mean, I guess it doesn't really get super interesting until you get to Inquisition, and then, Corypheus and all this other stuff. It really calls into question the official version of the Chantry. So I guess maybe that's where we start, right? Like, who is the Maker according to what the Chantry says, and then what lore stuff do we know for a fact kind of damages their narrative?
Well, so to begin with, the Maker is what the Chantry says is that he is the deity, the god that created everything. He created the spirits first. The spirits were extremely boring, and it like didn't really do anything exciting. That's essentially the story. So he said, "Wow, you guys are. I gave you all these gifts, and you're not doing anything with it." So then he made the humans, and then the humans started worship. That was So the humans started worshiping the old gods, and the Maker was like, "All right, this isn't working."
Enough of this silly shenanigans.
He turned his back on everybody, and is no longer watching over his children. And as the story goes, he one day heard the singing of a beautiful maiden, which was Andraste, and that was the first person he actually turned his gaze onto. And he said, like, "I'll do whatever you want, just become my bride." And she essentially said, "Free my people." So she goes off on this Joan of Arc-esque quest to free all of the people from Tevinter, and then she gets burned at the stake, and he takes her up. And now, as the chantry says, if everyone in all corners of the land sing the chant of light, then the Maker will come back and everyone loves him. So that's why everyone sings, and there's the chant, and that's what you gotta do, whatever. But that's kind of the TLDR in the Maker and Andraste.
Yeah, and all of that, I mean, none of that is disprovable exactly, at least not in the broad sense.
Not really. There's been a lot of speculation of kind of, and it's not so much the Maker, but more Andraste. There is a story, it is accepted in the Chant of Light that along with, I think it was around the same time she was hearing the voice of the Maker, she had a sister go in with her, and the sister actually got really hurt. I forget how exactly, to be honest, but there's some speculation that Andraste was a mage. So a lot of the disprovable things was Andraste a mage actually just hearing a spirit, which would be the Maker, or posing as the Maker, or there's also, so the Maker is supposed to have created the Fade in spirits, and because once upon a time Thetis and the Fade were one and the same, there is some fan speculation that because Solas drove the two apart and created the Fade as we know it, and the material world as we know it, that Solas is the Maker, and that he was calling to Andraste from Uthanera to free the elven slaves and blah blah blah. So that's kind of another fan speculation of who the Maker is.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the overlap, right? I mean, so we know then that Solas created the Veil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we take that as fact, and then we take the Chantry's account of it, either the Chantry has to sort of like back down on that point and be like, all right, well then the Maker didn't make the Fade, or that overlap kind of suggests that Solas, at least as far as that function of the Maker, right, that aspect of it, that matches up with the Chantry story unless they change it.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing though is that the Fade still existed in Solas's time. It just wasn't different from the material world. So I feel like there is an element of, I feel like you could have some mental gymnastics for the people who are really into the Maker to say like, well, that just means that he created the Fade in the one and the same, or perhaps it used to be separate and then it came back into one because of the elves and then it got separate again. Like, I'm sure there's a whole bunch of mental gymnastic that the believers of the Maker can come up with to make the Maker still relevant.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. You're saying that they would theorize that the Fade is not simply a plane separate from Thetis, and that the creation of the Veil is the creation of the Fade, but that the Fade could be considered some other type of state or aura or energy that intermingled with Thetis until the Veil was created, and then all of that was relegated into a separate plane. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm sure they could say something like, well, Solas was inspired by the Maker to do what he did and blah blah blah. He kind of like how the Herald of Andraste, like you as the player know that your actions are not defined by the Maker, but people say they are anyway.
What are the ashes of Andraste really? I mean, are they literally her ashes? And after you find them in Origins, I know it mentions like people start making pilgrimages and all that other stuff. I mean, Is it just me wanting everything to be neat to go like, how come they can't just like science the shit out of it and like take a couple pinches and do some experiments? Like if you could prove miracles happen with the ashes, doesn't that Isn't that kind of game changing?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. It disappeared.
Oh, that's right. Right? Doesn't it say that in the ending slide? Like, people started to go, but then they disappeared? Or is that...
Yeah, I think it was, I forget the exacts, but it's around when people started showing up for pilgrimages, it was just gone. Like, any traces of the dragon cult, the guardian, everything, the ashes just disappeared. It was just no more. So people were wondering what happened to it. Some believe that Arl Eamon wasn't actually healed by the ashes, that, what's his face? Brother Genitivi was lying, like, all sorts of stuff. Depending on how you handle that, like, Brother Genitivi can get, like, really traumatized by, like, oh, no, it did exist, I promise.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's... What are they? I don't know. Like, I remember when I played it the first time, because I was hearing, about the elven gods and then Andraste, and then you see Andraste's ashes, you're like, oh, well, I guess the elven gods just aren't real, because here's the goddamn ashes in front of my face, and they're doing, like, magical shit, so it just must be real. And then you get to Inquisition, and you're like, oh, no, the elven gods are also real, they're just not gods. So what are the ashes? Are they actually ashes? Are they actually Andraste? We don't really know. Now, in real world historical sense, like, there are accounts of, like, Roman whatever, of, like, a Jesus existing, but do you believe is he the son of God? Who, like, that's your choice. So yeah. I think it'd be something similar in Thedas, where Andraste was a real person, and maybe she was possessed by something, and so, like, her ashes are somehow magical. There might be something like that. We don't really know. If the Maker is real, I don't know, but I have a feeling Andraste actually was. So.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I guess I was connecting it more to, because the first time I played it, I don't know why I saw it as being almost like an Ark of the Covenant equivalent, like that one religious artifact that if you find it kind of becomes like a game changer as far as proof of something. Not sure why exactly, if that doesn't necessarily fit in this instance, but yeah, I guess so. So when I wikied it, because I couldn't remember exactly, I remembered both, right? Like, it disappears and the pilgrimage. It says that if you slay the dragon, it becomes a site for pilgrimage, but if you don't, or if Genitivi doesn't come with you, it disappears. I don't know if it becomes a pilgrimage and it disappears.
I thought it was both, but let's look this up, because I don't want to sit here and spout lies. Let's see. Okay, Urn of Sacred Ashes. Let's see. Let me read this real quick. Some years later, the Chantry announced that the resting place of Andraste's ashes had indeed been found. A ripple of excitement spread among the pious people of Thedas, with many undertaking pilgrimages to see the ashes or partake of their healing powers.
Also, that goddamn dragon fight was ridiculous. Just thinking
say?
I said that goddamn dragon fight was ridiculous, thinking back to it.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, if the dragon is there... Okay, so what the slides are telling me, if you make a deal with Colgrim, or, well, I guess the dragon is alive if you make a deal with Colgrim, the ashes cannot be found, and people doubt it. But if the dragon is dead, people do apparently partake in it. So then I don't know what happens if you don't kill the dragon. I guess people just use it up? I don't know. I don't know if they ever tell you what happened with that. Here's the thing. It might also be a thing where a lot of parts of this slideshow have been rewritten and forgotten about. For example, the stuff with Cullen is just completely erased. They don't remember it anymore. So I don't know if I'm just remembering, like, only the other slides, or I don't know what to say on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it could also just be one of those things, right, where the writers just didn't, kind of in that same vein, they didn't either know what they wanted to do with it, or maybe it's one of those things where, like, it does cause a lot of unanswered questions, so they're just like, yeah, we're just not going to pay attention to that.
Well, it's exploded now, so either way, it's gone.
Okay, God. so that's, one of those things that they may or may not choose to close the loop on, but,
I kind of feel like it's forgotten about. Like, I don't think it's ever going to come back. That's my best guess.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you on that. I think that's also sort of why I asked the question. It was sort of like what happened to those ashes anyway?
Here is a codex entry from Inquisition. What does it say? Okay, so as of Inquisition, it says agents of the Chantry investigated claims about the urn of sacred ashes and were eventually led as the hero had been led to the temple. By the time our soldiers reached it, however, the urn was nowhere to be found. So it sounds like, despite the ending slides saying that people make pilgrimages up there to take part in the ashes, as of Inquisition, they decided that they didn't want that to be a reality. So in the canon of the game so far, it just disappeared.
That makes sense, because otherwise it creates it actually probably answers too many questions. So it makes more sense to have it kind of disappear again. Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so I feel vindicated. Here's a side note. Here's the problem with, like, Dragon Age lore, is that a lot of stuff was set up in Origins that was then rewritten that, for the most part, it's kind of congruent with 2 in Inquisition. But you got 2 types of people who are Dragon Age fans. Those that really only like Origins, and then the people who like the whole series. So the people that only like Origins yell at me because I'm using the lore from the other 2 games. Drives me nuts. All right. Anyway, back to the actual topic. So yeah, the Urn of Ashes existed. Now it's gone. We don't know who took it or why. If we're going to go by origin rules, it sounds like the cult that was there, which one of the multiplayer characters was a part of that cult. Fun facts. I think it's actually the one named Tamar. Anyway,
coincidences.
So now that we've talked about what the Maker is, who it is, what existed, I don't think they should ever answer who the Maker is or was or could be. I think it should just be one of those things that's always left ambiguous, because I think no matter what they come up with, it's always going to be a shitty answer.
It's going to be disappointing for certain people. That's definitely true. There's going to be certain people that wanted it to be something else. I guess, well, I mean, let's talk about that then, right? Like, what do people want it to be other than the Solas thing? I guess that's probably the main one. Solas fans want it to be Solas.
Right, and then literally everyone else who is tired of the elves is, no, we don't want everything to be about the elves. And I think there's about a 50-50% of, like, who wants it to be Solas and who doesn't. Like, I kind of don't want it to be Solas just because I don't think it should be. I don't think Solas would do things that the Maker is said to do in the chant, which you could say the chant's wrong, blah, blah, blah. But how much history do we have to just rewrite? You know, like, I like the trope of history is wrong, but to make it all completely wrong is just like, all right, now you're just rewriting it. Like, I think it's better to have some elements of truth. So another option is that the Maker is just a spirit. Well, then, because the Avar worship spirit, so then was Andraste just crazy? Was she a mage? Like, why would she follow this giant spirit? Did a spirit make the entire world? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't think that's a really good answer either. I think the concept of the Maker is really about having faith in the unseen in a world where just the impossible is probable. So I think that's a much more interesting idea than actually having a concrete answer, because a lot of things in this world already have concrete answers. It's a lot more entertaining to just have something unseen that will never be seen, yet people really, really believe it, and it dictates a large portion of this world.
Yeah, I'm so I guess a couple of things, right? Like, I'm undecided on whether or not I think they should, like, divulge or try and answer the question in game. I don't think I have too strong of an opinion on it. Like, I can't say that I disagree with you as far as what you're saying. But I will take a slightly different angle on the as far as, like, what do they do with the question of the Maker? Because in my mind, they do actually have to. Well, they don't have to, but it would be better if they did something with the question. I like when they poke at it. I like when they give a little bit of evidence that maybe the Chantry's wrong, and then maybe something turns out that that says that the Chantry is right a little bit. What I think is a lot less interesting from a fictional standpoint is if it really is just that placeholder. Like I talked about the first time I was going through Origins, it just kind of seemed like they just thought they needed a fictional religion, and so here's a fictional god, and that's it. It's just there. It's just a placeholder. It's just meant to have some analog to the real world, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's fine. I mean, that gets the job done, I guess, if you want to have those tropes of religion and all that stuff in your fiction. But when it started to sort of play with the notion of whether or not this is all made up, is it actually related to some sort of elven lore? To me, from a story standpoint, that's when I sort of perked up and was like, oh, okay, well, this might be interesting. This is fun. Like, what do we do with this mystery? If they don't do anything with it, like, I don't think they should necessarily. I think I'm leaning more towards saying that they shouldn't explain everything. But if they just leave it in the background, that to me is also disappointing, because to me it was just a placeholder. That's just infinitely more boring to me than if they kind of layered in some doubt and then layered in something to sort of reassert that the maker, as the Chantry describes him, might be real.
Mm-hmm. Which I think the best time to do that would have been Inquisition, but they kind of kept the Chantry stuff on the DL, other than, talking about how you're the Herald of Andraste and you can agree or disagree. Like, I kind of wish there was, like, we had so much of elven magic going on. If there was just like that one, maybe something weird happened at the very end of the story. You're like, but what happened to that one thing? Like, that one thing is still not explained by elven magic. So what was that? Maybe that's Justinia's ghost, but even that can be explained more in spirits. But I wish there was just one thing that you would go, I wonder what that was.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as far as explaining stuff, right? It's like, how deep down do the explanations in Dragon Age fiction and lore go? Is it just the elves created everything, the spirits created everything? Who created spirits? What's a spirit? Like, within the context of Dragon Age, what is a spirit? And then do you want that sort of like infinite being above everything to say that it all came from the maker? I don't know. I think it's completely execution based as far as what makes for the most interesting story. I just know that the maker is such an interesting mystery and question. I want that to be at least alluded to and referenced as they go forward.
Mm-hmm. How would you do that going forward?
That's such a good question. And like I said, I am legitimately undecided. I don't know if I can take a side on this as far as like they should explain the maker or they shouldn't. I don't think it should be Solas. To me, that would be unsatisfying in a lot of ways. I like the idea of Solas more being just sort of like this ambitious entity who is really usurping godhood. Is sort of the way that I like to think of Solas, right? Like, he's actually trying to spite the gods, and he's sort of like trespassing in the territory of deities, so to speak. I don't know if that's clear in the lore, right? Like, Solas either is Fen'Haral and always has been, or at one point he was a mortal elf who has sort of mantled Fen'Haral. Am I explaining that correctly?
Well,
or is it
how
not clear?
He says it is that all elves were immortal once upon a time.
Yeah.
And godhood was just kind of a title put upon those who were powerful and that were in power long enough and became even more powerful for whatever reason. Kind of like Obelisk's quote of, I think Morgan asked, like, oh, was Mythal a real god or whatever? And he says, well, to you, it really makes no difference if she was or not. Like, she's more powerful than you, so who gives a shit? And he kind of says that, or alludes to, I guess, he was Solas first, and just through him being, I don't know, maybe a general or some powerful whatever, he became in the same line of those who would become gods. But as we see in Trespasser, he didn't want that godhood set upon the title of godhood set upon him. So it's I feel like the elven word for god is almost like more of a title than an actual godhood, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, so then it's actually almost the opposite then, right? He's not usurping it. He's almost sort of like rejecting it.
Mm-hmm. Because what does Varric say? Like, isn't it weird that he has to try to convince people that he's not a god?
Right, and Corypheus is doing the opposite.
Mm-hmm. So that's at least how I see it. I think there are rooms for other interpretations, but that's kind of how I viewed Trespasser as a whole.
Yeah, I kind of think the issue of how you handle the Maker is sort of tied up in how you handle it's exactly why I'm glad you did that summary on like what is elven godhood and what does it mean, because I feel like if you're trying to take apart and analyze like fictionally what would make the most interesting thing, then explaining the Maker is sort of hand in hand with explaining what elven godhood is and how it relates to how are things explained and why are they explained and to what degree they're explained.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can explain every little detail, that would get boring. But if you can't drill down far enough on the why questions, things feel a little too shaky, right? Even just from the fictional standpoint, it feels a little bit too much like hand waving and it's all made up anyway. But you just want to know that there's some set of rules behind things in a power structure and a hierarchy to who caused what. Because I don't know, for some reason that just makes things, particularly in fantasy, it just makes things feel more grounded in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the question is, at the end of the chain, what is it? Is it really powerful elves, or is it something bigger than that? And if it's something bigger than that, I don't know. Like, does that make the fiction more or less fun? And I don't know how to answer that question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't either. I don't think the devs do as well. So it's kind of a hard question because I feel like it would be so hard to make a satisfying end to that. And I really don't know how they would do it because someone's always going to be upset. Like, sometimes I feel like it's one of those questions where it's better left unsaid because the player's fantasy is going to be so much more interesting and better than whatever the writers come up with. And then everyone's going to be happy. Maybe frustrated that the answer's never solved, but at least they have that thing in their mind and they're convinced about it. And they know that's what really happened, even though like literally everyone has those thoughts. Which I'm sure has been something like that in the Dragon Age lore. I just can't think of an example at the moment, and it's also hard to do that for me because I feel like I haven't been in the fandom long enough to like really remember or understand old fan theories that were later proven wrong and people getting upset about it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Here's an interesting hypothetical though. If the Maker's not real in the sense that the Chantry says he is, mm-hmm. If we for some reason find that out in the game for a fact, for whatever reason, maybe the things that are attributed to the Maker are actually done by Solas or a combination of people, mm-hmm. Powerful elven gods, mages, what have you, and the player finds that out. If you were given a choice to tell Thetis essentially to expose that or not, what is the right decision there? In other words, does Thetis need the idea of the Maker even if he's not real?
I am reminded of a quote by Josephine where she talks about the importance of diplomacy and religion in diplomacy, where like all the nations of Thetis have so many differences, but the one thing they have in common is the Chantry, and that's one of the things is keeping the peace. So I would argue it is important for that reason. At the same time, don't you want people to like there's a lot of terrible shit that the Chantry does in the name of the Maker, so wouldn't you want to say, Chantry, stop doing all these terrible things because your god isn't real. It's. And then here's to say who would believe them. Like, you still got. What's the? Okay, it's been a long ass time since I played these games, but that's sort of the plot of Final Fantasy X-2. X2, where like in the first game you kind of prove that God isn't real or whatever, and in the next game there's like these two warring factions of the people who are like, well, God isn't real, I guess we got over it, and the other people are like, no, he is real, he's just different than we thought. So I feel like that would be kind of what would happen in Thetis. We're like, oh well, if this guy that we did worship was the Maker or whatever, who made that guy? There must be another Maker 0.2, like, turtles all the way down. Like, I feel like there would no matter, if you said the Maker isn't real, there's always going to be people who are going to make another religion. Something's just going to replace it.
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, and you're right. I mean, that's the first question, right? Is who would believe you, even if you said that were the case? There really wouldn't be a proof large enough to make people, to believe that. I think as an example, I know you said you haven't played Pillars of Eternity, right?
I have not, no.
So, I mean, this is not really a spoiler because it's a concession made early on in the game as a mystery, but the backstory to the beginning of the plot is that there was a war sort of in the years, several years before the start of where you're at on the timeline. There was this guy named Weidwen who claimed that he was the god of light, Aethys. Like, he claimed that he was God, and, presumably, like, apparently his face started shining so bright it was blinding and all this other stuff, so apparently he has some kind of power, but people were like, okay, but this guy says he's the physical embodiment of the god, that's ridiculous. So a big war starts over it, and there's some people who are followers of Aethys. There's, like, multiple gods in the Pillars of Eternity universe. Mm-hmm. There's some followers of Aethys who are, like, really happy about this, and then there's some who think it's blasphemy. Long story short, they blow up Weidwen with a giant magical bomb.
Okay.
So they blow the guy to smithereens. And so there's a bunch of people who thought that he was a god, and so now they're like, well, is there one less god now? And so, but it doesn't really change anything, right? Like, people continue worshiping Aethys and just go, oh, that guy was, even people who said that guy was Aethys, they just changed their mind. They go, oh, I guess he wasn't Aethys because they blew him up. I mean, they literally blew the guy to smithereens, and people were still like, nah, that wasn't Aethys.
Or Aethys meant to die to test your faith.
Yeah, or just, literally, that's why that question is sort of so interesting. Now, this is sort of a slight spoiler. I won't give the answer, but by the time you get to Pillars of Eternity 2, they straight up answer that question.
Oh.
So, it is, and by the way, I think that it's brilliant. I actually haven't beaten Pillars 2, so I don't know how ultimately satisfying that question is. That's sort of more in the background, though, of Pillars 1. It's, it's kind of an interesting, lore level. People debate about it, and some people are still pretty testy about it. But, yeah, they answered it, and they answered it in a big bad way. I totally didn't expect them to answer it that clearly in Pillars 2, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I actually liked the way. If the answer were as satisfying in Dragon Age as it was in Pillars, I would be like, that's fucking cool. Mm-hmm. So it is possible, but yeah, to your point, it's also possible that unless something really dramatic happens that's undeniable that everybody has to accept, people would just debate about it anyway. I did want to say, so devil's advocate real quickly, because I think I kind of believe I'm more into thinking that Josephine kind of expresses as far as, the belief structure is kind of important to the overall stability and the way that, diplomatic relations go, etc. But just playing devil's advocate to that a little bit, does that mean it's not possible to broker some sort of peace with the Qunari? Because they don't accept the Chantry.
Well, I don't think it's possible to broker some peace with the Qunari because their belief system outright says that everyone needs to follow the Qun, and everyone following the Qun is the only way for peace. So yeah, they're going to be pushing that narrative for all of eternity until it's destroyed, unless something changes, which I kind of doubt it does, but that's more in the leadership. So that's my reasoning for it. There's not going to ever be peace. But if they didn't have that, then in our world, a bunch of different religions get along for the most part. There's definitely been wars over religion, but there are people, there it is possible to get along.
Well, also, and I mean, look, I at some point I almost feel like we have to stop apologizing for touching on somewhat touchy issues that relate to the real world, because I think maybe that's why people actually tune in. So honestly, I'm not even going to apologize for it. But I mean, you make that point about how there is at least a tenuous peace in the real world despite varying religions. And when we talk about the Qunari and the fact that it states pretty explicitly that everyone needs to follow the Qun, I mean, there's a couple of religions like that in the real world that are not ambiguous about the fact that the goal is everyone has to believe this.
Well, yeah, but the Qunari also believe that it needs to be done by force, so that would be more along the lines of like extremism in like various religions in the world here. So I guess like if they the chant believes the same thing for the most part, but while there has been wars over it, they do also attempt a peaceful way. And while the Qunari also do attempt a peaceful way, their peaceful way is a lot more manipulative and I don't know how a good way to say torture.
Sure, yeah, re-education and all that, yeah.
So, like, in the comics, it's those who speak the Silent Grove and Until We Sleep. I have one big book of it, so I always confuse the two. But you have the story of Isabella and like how her mother was kind of into the whole Kuhn thing, and then like how it affected her and her family, and like how bad it was for Ravain. So it's I really don't think the Qunari are going to go down in a peaceful situation until everyone is with the Kuhn. Because there is only peace within the Kuhn.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so let me see if I can. I'm going to play more devil's advocate here, right? I don't even know if this is my opinion, but I'm trying to cause trouble.
Okay.
We could go the complete opposite direction of what Josephine is saying. I think there's a case to be made that peace is actually happening in spite of the different religions and not because of them. So I'm not even going to use the real world religions as an analog because I don't think I have to. I think there's enough stuff within Dragon Age alone to make the example of like, you could say the Kuhn specifically says it has to be done by force, etc., and that they're sort of aggressors in that stance. Like, okay, sure, but the Chantry has also, done inquisitions and exalted marches, and they are a militant force at times, crushing the elves or other sort of competing religions. And it could be said that the Chantry at their best is just sort of the Chantry being a little more freaking restrained than that. So the peace is really when the religions don't act as violently as they seem to want to act anyway. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Like, it's actually in spite of the religions, not because of them?
Yeah. I guess even more so because the origins of Andrastianism is her going to war and spreading, the way of the Maker or die. Like, it was Andraste's movement was not peaceful.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah, I wonder if then, if the goal is for there to be peace in Thetis, and there was some way, if there was one unifying theory, so to speak, of how to explain everything, does that really create peace? Or would we, going back to that that Pillars of Eternity example about Aethys, would people just go to war over it even more?
I think people, I don't know, I think people would go to war no matter what. Like, even in Thetis, like, even though Orlais and Ferelden have the same basic religion, they still go to war with each other. And same thing with...
It's true.
Well, I mean, look at the Tevinter versus the Chantry. It's technically the same basic religion, but they just broke apart, and now they war over who has the correct version of that same religion. And it's really only tweaked very minorly. It's really just that one line of magic. If one line about... Oh, and men. So if they just decided that, which if you have Liliana as divine, she does say both genders can do priesthood. So if you have Liliana as divine and you just change that one line about magic, you essentially have the same chantries on both sides. So I don't know.
So what you're saying is magic and penises change everything.
Or vaginas, yeah. It's depending if you would think the Tevinter is the correct one or not.
The Chantry is really focused on magic and genitalia. It's
one of the bedrocks.
Did you know there's a codex entry? This is random fact. There's a codex entry describing that one of the divines was most likely well, they say a man, but maybe it was a transgendered woman or whatever. But the whole codex entry is about how the divine died, and someone helping with the funeral rites saw a penis, and there's this whole debate like it wasn't a penis, there was just a squirrel on her crotch or something like that. It was really weird. Anyway, so that's a codex entry that exists.
God, there's one of those deep codex entries that
only I have read.
Now we know it exists. The question of whether or not they are going to answer, who the maker is. I'm disappointed in the fact that I think I'm leaning heavily towards the fact that they're just not going to try it because it's going to be too difficult.
I feel like given enough time, they could answer it. I just feel like there's a lot better questions to answer. Like, I feel like if they start answering the question of who is the maker, I feel like that's when they've run out of ideas. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's a good point.
I would much rather know what's the deal with the doors, who are the people across the sea, how about those elves, like what's going on with Flemeth. Like there's a whole bunch of more pressing issues.
Right.
So if given enough time, they could ask and answer the question of who is the maker. I just feel like it's just so down the list of interesting questions in Thetis that I honestly don't give a shit about it. I really don't. I think it's fine as it is.
Yeah, I guess that's the only divergence we have between the two of us. Like, it's definitely, like I said, I don't feel strongly about it. Like, they have to answer the question. If they really don't, I'll just be like, okay, that's totally fine. It's just, I do think that when you set up something that big, you've got to pay it off, even with more mystery, right? Like, I don't need it to be answered or resolved. I'm like, you got to pay attention to something that's that big. Otherwise, you just set it up to be a placeholder, which technically speaking, that's fine if it's just a placeholder, because like you said, there's all these other interesting lore questions that we can chew on. Mm-hmm. I guess I just lean more towards I would rather have them do something with it rather than nothing. Mm-hmm. And just please don't be Solas, because I just think that would be that is such a fandom answer, and I just don't. I really hope fandom doesn't override what would be could be very interesting from a fictional standpoint.
Here's something that I've always wondered. Like, writers, I think they actually have contracts, or they're not actually supposed to read a lot about fan fiction and fan theories, because there's this, like, legal ambiguity of, like, what happens when a writer steals from a fan, but the fan can't really prove it, but everyone knows, like, just kind of this weird space. But I'm sure they hear something. I'm sure they have rumors or whatever, and like it would really be easy just to go home on your own time and start reading it up, how much of fan ideas have actually changed the medium in some way? And that's what I would want to know. Like, if enough people sit here and bang their fists on the table and demand, we want to know who the maker, would they sat there and be like, yeah, right, they want it, so we'll give it to them?
Maybe, but I think that's where I go back to your answer of that's going to be like the last thing they do, actually. Mm-hmm. Like, I think as long as they're compelled to tell an interesting, impactful story based on, whatever motivates them as creative people, they're going to do that. And then maybe once they feel like they've done that, then maybe that's the time to go like, man, the fans really don't want us to close this franchise out unless we answer this. So maybe they throw that out there as a bone, like sort of like fan service. And even then, I think that would end up being something more tongue-in-cheek, or even then, still something a little more vague. Mm-hmm. What's the worst way they could do it? Is it just Solas, or is it what's worse? It's Solas, or it's exactly the way the Chantry says it is. Like, which one of those is worse?
I feel like I almost want to side with Solas being the worst answer, because he's done so much already that a lot of people are going to go, again!
Yeah.
Everything leads back to the elves. Like, if it was something like, maybe Solas had a hand, like, well, let's say that the maker is a human version of the Evanuris. All right, maybe he knew Solas, maybe he worked with the elves, whatever, but he's just a human. He's a human that gained the power of whatever. You know, fine. I wouldn't be upset with it. If it is actually Solas using the exact same storyline, then I'd be like, all right, a little bit cheap. We all saw that coming.
Yeah.
So it just, yeah, as you kind of said, it just feels too obvious. I think another sort of cheap answer would be if he's a spirit, because then it's like, I don't want to say no better than the Avar, but I guess that's what I'm kind of thinking. Like, he's just some spirit that got enough worshippers, and because there are other spirits that have a whole bunch of worshippers, he just ended up getting the most. And then why did that spirit, like, did it actually make the humans? Is it like the Chantry? What's going on? Like, which, on that note, if elves are supposed to be like spirits, wouldn't a spirit just being, when the Maker just being a spirit, essentially be calling it, oh, it's a part of the elves again? Like,
right, it all just goes back to the elves.
Yeah, so I feel like there's so many ways it could go back to the elves, and I really don't want it to. Like, I think it would be best suited if whatever the Maker is had a very human-specific origin. Because it's already very human-specific.
Somewhere the Dwarven fans are like, really? Really? Human, you say? Not Sandal? Sandal's not the Maker? Is that what you're saying? Sandal is not the Maker.
Oh, boy. Sandal is the Maker. That one drives me crazy. Why? Why?
Because enchantment.
Here's another fan theory I've heard of a lot before, is there is the story of Elgernon. I think this one's from Origins, a codex entry, but he essentially usurped his father, the sun. So some speculate that the sun is the Maker, if that makes, like, the sun being like the, you know, the star, the celestial star, not like a sun as a child. But so that's one thing, which again, like, I don't want it to be whatever the son that Elgernon's father was. Like, I don't want that to be the Maker, because again, it goes back to the elves. And I don't want it to be Sandal, because that just makes no goddamn sense. But, golly.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you that Solas would be the worst, but maybe it would be less satisfying, but maybe easier to wrap up. The reason why I think Solas is worse is for all the reasons that I stated before. But like, if it was just the Maker is what the Chantry says he is, that's still vague enough to be interesting, right? Like, that still doesn't explain a lot. Like, okay, the Maker is what the Chantry says he is, but what the hell is a Maker then, right? Like, you still have the metaphysical aspect of, like, what does that even mean? And Dragon Age has just never really contended with that. Like, which is also why I don't think they'll do that, because it raises too many questions about metaphysics that Dragon Age has never gone into. They basically explain things with the elves did it or spirits. That's how they explain things. Like Elder Scrolls has something where, you know, I don't even want to start trying to get into explaining Elder Scrolls gods, but like Akatosh is time, essentially. Right, so like there's that aspect of it of like, well, what is Akatosh? Like, well, Akatosh kind of is time, so much rather than being a being. So Akatosh can be represented as a being or as a dragon or whatever, but Akatosh essentially is time. And I know someone's going to correct me because I'm not saying that correctly, because technically Akatosh is a lesser version of an even higher level of god that is time, but whatever.
I honestly, the only so I kind of got into Skyrim like when it came out, well, a couple years after it came out, really. And when I was trying to learn more about it, because I had so many questions, I just had to stop when I got to the divine beings, because that fucks with your head. That's complicated.
It's insane.
Anyway, here's a question real quick. If maybe one reason I don't think that the series should answer what the Maker is that the series isn't really about uncovering secrets of the past. It's more about like the story of humans and people and how they deal with it. And I feel like it's a much better story of like people struggling with their faith, kind of like Cassandra, rather than
you're right.
the maker was whatever. Like,
Yeah.
if you go to divinity, like, the story of divinity is becoming a god and usurping what god there was.
Absolutely.
There has a really good place there, and it sounds like Pillars of Eternity has that same sort of thing, where in Dragon Age, where it shines is the story of the little people. And while Solas is such an interesting character, you kind of get this sense of he was just an underdog with these very powerful beings, and this little guy was able to usurp them, essentially. So I guess you could maybe make it where the maker has some sort of story behind that, where he was just some dude that became really powerful and created Thedas or whatever. But I feel like, I don't know, it kind of loses what Dragon Ages means to me. Like, it kind of loses the focus of the series, but, like, maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just how I see it.
No, I think you nailed it. I honestly, I was about to say we should probably close the episode because we're kind of starting to spin our wheels. We can't really get to the bottom of this. I think you just answered it about as well as anyone could have answered it. That's not, like, really, because, like, that's not within the spirit of the franchise. I don't think that's what the writers intended, and I don't think thematically, I don't think that's where the meat is for Dragon Age. I don't think that's what we as players get the most out of, even if we would like it to be. So when you compare it to, you mentioned Divinity, I don't want to spoil Pillars of Eternity. I would just say if anyone is interested in this topic of sort of like, well, what are the gods and this set of, go play Pillars of Eternity if you haven't. It is excellent. In particular, like I said, I don't want to spoil the end of Pillars 1 or the beginning of Pillars 2, but just trust me, if you like this topic and you think it's interesting in fantasy role-playing games, Pillars of Eternity is amazing. But if you look at Divinity, if you look at Pillars, if you look at even Elder Scrolls, there's a whole rationale within the lore of Elder Scrolls about how potentially every player character is actually a divine aspect, and so it always relates back to the gods, just the same way in Pillars it all relates back to the gods, the same way in Divinity it all relates back to the gods. In Dragon Age, it is explicitly not that. In Dragon Age, it all relates back to the individual and how they make choices as they relate to the status quo and the power structures of politics and race and religion. Religion as an institution, religion as sort of a political force, but not metaphysics and like the essence of deity, etc. Like Dragon Age really is about a more humanist, not strictly speaking human, like elf, dwarf, whatever, but like humanist in the sense of individualist, like determination as far as like you said, what the future is going to be. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe that's what it is. That's why trying to answer this big metaphysical question about who the maker is would be unsatisfying, because it's just not at home in the Dragon Age series. What's at home in Dragon Age is you, an individual, can make choices and you can shape the course of a country or a continent, even in the face of kingdoms and armies and, yes, religious organizations, but ultimately it's about people. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the answer of why we shouldn't why the series shouldn't answer who is the maker.
Yep.
Boom. Done.
All right, we solved it. Stop asking me who the maker is.
Everybody, stop asking Caitie who the maker is.
Oh boy. Was there anything else on this topic? Because it sounds like it's getting about that hour mark. I think we've done it the best we could.
I think it's a tough topic to go into. I think we did about as well as one could be expected.
Yeah, we meandered a bit, but we got there in the end.
It's a somewhat meandery kind of topic.
Yeah. Well, I guess we just wrap it up then.
Where can the folks find you, Caitie?
Oh, hey, I usually ask that. You stole it from me. That's my one job on the show, because you usually do the intros a lot better than I do. Okay, you can find me at Ghildirthalen on Twitter or Ghildirthalen on YouTube. Also, Ghildirthalen on Reddit if the spirit possesses you to send me a very long PM about why we're extremely wrong. I'm really slow with getting back, so I may or may not answer. But I will read it. I just don't know if I'll answer. Jordan, where can they find you?
They can find me at The Exalted March on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And now folks can find us. Well, here, you'll be listening to this if you're not listening just to the audio version. Now, obviously, we have all the video versions up on Codex Added.
which is also our streaming video games channel. We don't just do Bioware stuff. I've been streaming The Witcher. We're trying to actually set up with Jackdaw and Lucas / Fusselcorn playing Divinity all together, which is going to be a clusterfuck. But
that's going to be fun.
So, yeah, I also I keep getting this question sometimes, like, can we do something with Android? We are on Anchor, I believe that's what it's called, right?
Yep, we're on Anchor, which is very easily available, and we should be on Google Play, I think.
We are. Because we are using Anchor, it actually pushes to a whole bunch of different podcasting. So we're technically on iTunes, we're on the Google Play, we're on a lot of places where podcasts are found. So go ahead and find us. But yeah, if you have an Android and you've been wanting to listen to the podcast and we've just been saying iTunes, it is technically in other places. I just think I don't have an Android phone, so I think in terms of iTunes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then also Anchor itself has the app. That's actually normally what I've been using. So we're available all places podcasts are found.
Yes.
I think we're going to say goodbye now. Is that what's happening?
I was going to say goodbye. I don't know if
do it. Tell the fine folks goodbye.
All right, goodbye. Go directional. This is a messy ending, but we got there in the end.